Okay, I think we'll go ahead and start a couple of minutes early. So, good afternoon. Welcome to Reducing Risk by Managing Body Camera Records. This, uh, this is a condensation of a two-day class. I'm going to try to fit it into an hour. That's going to be a personal challenge, right? It's like meeting that public records deadline, only faster. So my name's Dan Zender. Come on, let's get this over here. There we go. So my name's Dan Zender. I do work for PRI, and I'm also the president of Principus Group, which is my own company that does a lot of things in the body camera and risk management policy arena. For those of you, I guess you figured out by now the reason we stand behind the podium is because we're doing this virtually for some folks online. And so for those of you online that are with us, thank you for attending. Hope you find this informative. So the intent of this class is, this session is, and so one thing too, for all of you that I'd ask that you hold your questions till the end, and same for the folks online. If you'd send your questions in via the chat box, that allows us to keep track of things. So we're going to look at, this session's focused on video, body camera video records management. And they are not your typical record. I'm sure those of you that have body cameras have figured that out already. How many of you are in agencies that have body cameras? I would hope the majority are either getting them. Okay, good. Anybody having a challenge with that whole body camera record thing? Yeah, it's pretty much of a hot mess, isn't it? Well, we're going to hopefully clarify some things, at least give you some things to think about. And it's what the class is designed to do. Can't get all the answers in an hour, but this is designed to start some constructive discussion inside your agency. Have things that you can take back with you, and hopefully start to kind of figure out how you're going to maneuver through this path of body camera records. So we're going to talk a little bit about body camera philosophy, for your agency's philosophy, the issue of privacy, policy, and process. And I call that the 4 Ps, and you'll see a slide on that in a minute. We're going to talk about using those 4 things to mitigate risk. And we're also going to talk, because this always comes up, even though we could spend a whole lot of time on this issue of redaction. How many of them here do redaction? How many of you? If you're online, if you do redaction, please send a thing in saying, yeah, I do redaction. Raise those hands again so I can see. A lot of you. How many of you have been trained in privacy issues in the state that you operate in? Are you willing to take a test on it? No. Yeah, that's what I figured. Okay, we'll talk about that. So body camera videos are a special kind of record. Why is that? Well, all you got to do is look at the videos that we see, pictures both from body cameras and cell phones. They are what we are dealing with as a profession. It no longer matters what an officer says, what he or she does, or fails to do, what they write. Everything's body camera video now. And arguably, this is the most important record that your agency has. And why is that? Because it records everything your agency does or fails to do. It records your adherence. Everybody thinks, oh, they focus on the body camera records. It's, body camera policy itself, right? Well, it focuses on body camera operations. No, it focuses on your use of force policy, your pursuit policy, your interaction with the public policy, your report writing policy, everything that camera catches. And the biggest thing it catches is your organizational culture. How many of you seen these videos on YouTube or on the news where you just cringe when you see these things. You go, oh my God, right? It's some of the things you look at, it's appalling, right? So this is the world we operate in. And as I like to say, we own it. When we send an officer out to the street with that camera on, whether you're in an agency of 6 police officers or 600 or 6,000, you own everything on every one of those videos. Everything. And the public expects to see it. Here's the problem. We don't have the ability to look at, if you're from a small agency, somebody should be looking at those videos, pretty much all of them. Nobody expects LAPD, NYPD, the vast majority of agencies in this country to look at every single video. Doesn't matter though, we own it. Because sooner or later, if something happens, the public's going to want to see it. And what you don't want to do is get caught, be surprised. So somebody should be looking at these videos, these records. So they're very important because the public does expect to see them. How many of you in here are from agencies of 100 officers and less? Vast majority of you. Okay. So here's the rub with that. Small agency, you better be looking at a lot of those videos. Somebody better be looking. Nobody's going to accept the incident that happens on video that is that ugly incident that happens at 2 o'clock in the morning and your chief or your sheriff gets that phone call. Nobody's going to accept the thing, well, we didn't know that was happening. When somebody puts a public records request in they know they can't get the video for Officer Smith that did the bad thing or the controversial thing. But guess what? I want to do a public records request for every stop that guy did for the last 6 months. And oh my God, guess what? The same behavior that got caught, he's been doing for the last 6 months. And you're an agency of 60 officers and the agency goes, well, we didn't know. You can see where that's going to go. So these are very important records. And as you'll see, how they're managed inside the agency is very critical. So body camera, the process is pretty easy to understand, right? So you capture video. The officer's out on the street, captures video. He or she transfers it up to your storage, whether that's an on-prem storage or in the cloud. You have a management system, depending on your vendor. You've got I call it content management or digital evidence management system. Somebody retrieves it, and then we share it between the users. So this share part is where you folks come in. Sometimes. We're going to find out just how much you are involved in this process. So if you were in my class this morning on policy, you saw this slide before. There's 3 consumers of public records or records inside. I like to call them the cops consumers. So you have the courts, you have the organization, and the public. And so all those records, these body camera records, go in what I like to call buckets. So the evidence one is pretty easy, right? We all know that. That's the stuff we're never going to release, right? We're not going to give it because it's evidence on an ongoing trial. That evidence bucket of videos should be in a clear place in your digital evidence management system. That's for use by the courts. There's a lot of buckets that the organization should be using. Many of these buckets are not being used, or they're only being used halfway. You've got public relations use of the videos. You've got performance, transparency issues, risk management. There's a lot of things these videos can be used for. Again, who are they going to come to, right? Where do those records reside in your agency? We'll talk about that in a minute. And finally, there's the public, your body camera records, where most of you will be involved in this process. How many of you actually handle the release of body camera records right now? Okay, so a lot less probably. And if you're online, please in the chat. So we're getting, I do, I do, I do, I do. So most of the people online are actually handle the records, the distribution. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But of the people here that have body cameras, which was just about everybody, there's only about 30% of you, or the people in this room actually are the person managing that. So if you fail to do this properly, this is what you get. Headlines. And I get a feed every day. I mentioned this in the session earlier. I get a feed every day, and every day there's something about failure by an agency to release, follow the law, do those things that they're supposed to do by the law. There's a lot of resistance to release. Unfortunately, agencies sometimes are not as good as they perceive themselves to be when it comes to these decision points. And we're going to talk a little bit about who makes the decisions to release and all that. And this is important to understand the big picture because eventually it trickles down to a lot of you in this room. So this is where we have the problem with body camera and records. It's this public connection. Body camera records released to the public. But why is that? Well, it's a little complicated. And I need to help break that down so that you understand what the complicated moving parts of this is. So there's something I've called the 4 Ps of public records dissemination. And that is, philosophy, privacy, policy, and process. And an agency and records folks are juggling these balls. Okay, it would be fine if these crystal balls were being juggled by one person, but they're not. And many times there's 5 hands trying to juggle these balls. And we're going to talk about each one of these because it's critical to the understanding of the process that you have to develop for releasing your body camera video to understand every facet of this kind of complicated system. So we'll talk about the juggling of those because ultimately what this is about is to reduce risk to your agency. And what's that risk? Of, the public records request comes in and the video isn't there because it got deleted. Or the risk to the agency is significant because you had a video critical incident not being released, decisions made not to release that video, or not all the videos are there. So there's a lot of managing this program effectively is key to reducing the risk to your agency when it comes to failure with body camera video. Because again, the old saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, video is worth about 100,000 words. And all you have to do is be involved in a major incident in your agency to realize the implications of that single video, group of videos. So this whole process that we're going to talk about later is all about reducing risk. And again, if you were in this morning session, you saw this slide also, which is a definition of risk management. We're not going to get into this too much, but we can use this video, all those things that you saw on the slide of the organizational consumer, we can use all these videos to help reduce risk to the agency. And so the idea of using these body camera videos, both as a public record and internal use, is extremely important because if somebody isn't looking at these videos, we're going to have a problem, right? Because something bad may be on those videos and somebody may see it, but if it doesn't get to where it needs to go, oh, my battery running low. Hey, Kevin, can you give me a hand with this? I'm not sure what. Oops. For those of you online, don't leave me. It just.
This is the one.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Yeah, how do you get back on here? Hey, there we go. At least we got that back up.
Well, we need to plug in. Okay, so this is coming out.
So my folks online, can you hear me? If you can hear me, would you? Okay, good. So we got a thumbs up. We're back in action, except we have no power. So bear with me. This is worse than turning on a body camera. So I'm going to continue to go. Kevin's going to be working down here trying to get some power to us. So risk management is simply using the tools, is a tool used to identify potential risks and liabilities to the agency and coming up with ways to hopefully mitigate that or to avoid it altogether. This will all make sense in a minute. So let's talk about the first P, the old philosophy, which is circle the wagons, okay? So if you've been on the police department longer than 10 seconds, if you have any institutional knowledge, you know that this is part of the problem, right? Years ago, before body cameras even, it was, you're going to get this record or this case file, when you can pry it out of my cold dead hands type of mentality. And so we are now in an era that mentality doesn't work, and it's being challenged in court. Personal story, I'm sure you're all aware of the shooting, 1 October shooting in Las Vegas. There were obviously hundreds of officers responding to that event. And we, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, tried to, that's a huge, because we got the public records request. We want to see all the video. Okay, it's the media. We want to see all the video. Well, think about that. Hundreds of officers, not just body camera video, but all video attached to it, surveillance video, cell phone video that was coming in. And we said, that's a lot of work to do. We don't have it. And our general counsel tried to fight the battle. It went to federal court, and we were ordered to do it. Okay, we were ordered to do it. And that's what's going to happen. In some case, you can be ordered to do it. And let's hope that you never have an event of that magnitude, because it was a huge personnel drain on the department as well as a financial drain on the department. But the public expects to see video. The media expects to reinforce that perception. They want to see the video. And so if something happens, you better be prepared to release the video. So the old philosophy is circle the wagons. Now the new philosophy, okay, is transparency. How many times have we heard that word, transparency, right? That's, we're buying body cameras because of transparency. We're going to be transparent with the public. So we buy the body cameras, and then somebody comes along and says, I want to see it. Nope, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to show it to you. Kind of begs the question, why are you spending the money? Why spend $1 million, $2 million to buy body cameras for your agency to reduce complaints? We can do that the old-fashioned way. We can investigate them. Why are we, if we're telling the public we're being transparent, why are we not releasing it when we should? So I can tell you that I've read hundreds of body camera policies, and they all start off with something like this. The Acme Police Department believes in transparency with the public. In an effort to do that, we're instituting body cameras, blah, 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 blah. So the first challenge is that first P. We getting there? So we're trying to change our mindset from okay, hold on, we're just going to go with it.
Okay.
Okay.
It's not charging now.
Okay, so we're trying to change the mindset from finding reasons not to release anything, which is the circle the wagon mentality, to releasing everything we possibly can unless there's a clear reason not to. There's a distinction there. Okay? So I'm not advocating by any stretch of the imagination that we release body camera video for, or any type of record, in an active homicide investigation. On the same token, if you hide things and try to find reasons to not release it, like, okay, you know, I've got 20 hours of video on a domestic violence call, and the only part of that and all doesn't happen in a house, it happens out on a street somewhere. You know, why are we not releasing that? Some of that video, could it be released? Okay. There's a lot of issues with that, but we're finding exclusions. As I've taught this particular class around the country for the past past 5 years, 6 years, going on 6 years now. I've talked to agencies that will find any reason that they possibly can to restrict the video. How many of you are in agencies that like that? It's okay, you can raise your hand. It's one, okay? I suspect there's more of them. Now, this isn't your decision to make. This is a philosophy from your chief executives, okay? Unfortunately, frequently, they're not the only ones involved in that decision process. Your general counsel of your agency, your city attorney, people are involved. And so this philosophy piece has to be decided beforehand, because if the philosophy is not to release anything, then your job becomes exponentially easier, okay? If it is the second, release everything we can, unless there's clear reasons not to, then the workload becomes more. So you should be going to this philosophy, the mindset should be in your agency, changing philosophy to release everything you possibly can. I know that comes as kind of cringeworthy to those of you out there that have to do this work, but that's what needs to happen, because that's what the public expects. And you're going to take huge political blowback if you don't do it. If you say, oh yeah, we're transparent, but no, you can't have that, okay? And so it's very important that you look long and hard at that piece in your agency. And if you can take a message back to your chief executives, that would be it. Now there's a way to walk that tightrope, but having defined that, how many of you, and for folks online, just go ahead and put it in there. How many of you have an agency where you are the first finding reasons not to release anything type? Raise your hand if you got, that's you. Okay, one. So everybody else is releasing everything they possibly can unless there's a clear reason not to. Okay? So I'm just going to pick somebody, ma'am. You raised your hand, so. Well, there was a lot of people with their hands up, but I just saw you first. So how many records, body camera records, did you release? How many requests did you get in last year? Do you know that information? Okay. 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 Well, we're talking public for just the public records. So I asked the question, and you heard me ask the question. She said they really haven't gotten a whole lot. Who's yes, yes. So records folks find themselves caught in a uncomfortable position many times, going, well, the state law says, and then you have administrators go, oh no, we're not doing that, and then you have general counsels that are saying, kind of agreeing. We'll get to those folks here in a minute. And so you folks up here, you have, how many of Mhm.
People might come and say, well, your officer did this and this, and it's like, well, let's go.
You'll look, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the what they told me is that they have somebody, a lot of people come in, make claims against officers, and then when you show them the video, it's like, oh, well, or they realize that they're wearing body cameras, everything changes. Anybody in here have a good handle on the number of records, open records requests or public records requests, whatever you call it in your state, that you've gotten regarding body cameras and how many you've granted? Yes, ma'am.
600 backlogs approximately.
Okay.
Because we implemented about 600 cameras at the same time.
Okay. So 600, you got 600 requests for video.
Yeah. And we probably released 100 within the last year. We're still,
100 in the last year.
we're
Okay.
working on them.
Okay. I've got somebody online. We got Heather Moody, who says she gets them daily. Okay. So we've gone from we hardly give any out to we're giving them out daily, or we've got hard numbers, right? So there's a lot to deal with here. This is why the 4 crystal balls have to be managed out in your agency, or you're going to have a lot of problems. And unfortunately, what's happened is nobody really, as we'll talk about in a minute, nobody really thought about this when we rushed to get the body cameras and throw them on the cops. Nobody thought about some of the people that supply the consumers, which is the public, and you are the folks doing that. So there's the big body camera debate. Okay, it's accountability versus privacy, and who decides? Is it the public, is it the police, or more frequently, it's the politicians? Okay, and if you probably, depending on which state you're from, probably haven't followed it. I've watched this on a national level. Anybody from California here? Okay, so for the folks from California, right? Think back in 2015, if somebody wanted a body camera video from your agency, what would you have told them? We don't have to give it to you. It's not a public record for you. You're not going to get it. And I've had many conversations over the years with agencies in California that said, oh, that's never going to happen here, never going to happen here. Guess what? In 2019, January 1st, 2019, your world changed. And there are other states, the same situation, right? So what's happening is because agencies, and all you have to do is pick up the paper, watch a news story. It's all over the place the last couple of months. There's always an article that says, body cameras have great promise for police accountability only if somebody gets to see the video. And that's talking about the folks in this room, well, the agency making the decision, but the folks in this room executing that. And frequently what's happening is the political entities in the states are starting to determine that. Anybody from North Carolina in here? Anybody online from North Carolina? If you've been following North Carolina, you had to go to court order, go to court. They had a very controversial shooting, and this whole court order system got questioned, and now they're in, I'm not sure whether or not the bill's been passed, but all that's starting to change, okay? So if agencies don't do this, figure out how to do this, your political entities, either at the local or state level, are going to do that for you. So accountability, these are the things, this issue of accountability and privacy is very critical, right? How do we how do we as law enforcement, how are we accountable to the public, but being mindful of privacy? Well, it's a huge balancing challenge. It can be done, but the challenge, well, kind of the dirty little secret. How many of you have actually released video where you had to do a lot of redaction? Okay, so about 30, 40% of you. And if you're online, they got a lot of yeses online. Okay, so this is a real challenge. You know, how do I get that video out there so that the requester gets what they're looking for, but we don't invade privacy to the level that's unacceptable to the people involved, right? So that becomes a real challenge, right? It's a balancing act. And as I'm fond of saying, you know, you're the ones that are going to have to do that. Somebody in your agency is deciding what's private. And unfortunately, you know, while I like to think we are the guardians of privacy, which we are, shouldn't be, but that's what we have to do, you're not going to make everybody happy all the time. Somebody's going to want a video and they're going to say, well, it went too far. You showed too much or you didn't show enough. In the early days of body camera, anybody here from Washington State? Okay, remember the old Vaseline on the lens redaction from Seattle? You know, it was blobs moving in the background and you couldn't hear the audio. Gone too far covering privacy. So, you know, privacy succeeded, but accountability was lost because you couldn't really tell what was going on. So who decides whether or not something gets released? So this is the issue of your city attorney, your general counsel versus the department. And I will just throw this out there. For the folks online, is your chief or your sheriff the final deciding authority on whether something gets released? Can you hear me now? Online? You got me now? Okay.
Can they see?
Got no visual, so. Okay, hang on, we're getting there.
Very good. Yeah. Put your mouse over here. And just fast forward. Sorry, guys.
All right, folks, we'll get here in a second. We'll get caught up here. Okay, so we were talking before I was rudely interrupted by power problems. So we were talking about who makes the decision. This is part of this philosophy thing. This is very important, right? Again, decisions are made at levels above you that affect your day-to-day operations, whether or not it's released. There are some agencies where the general counsel in concert with the chief executive of the agency will make a decision on every body camera video release. That sound familiar to anybody in here? Anybody do that? There's a couple of yeses. If you're online, anybody online where that's the case? Our detective sergeant has the final release. That's from Ashley Mann. City clerk, city managers. Okay. Ultimately, though, whose responsibility is it? I guess it belongs to the sheriff or the chief. It's their agency, their video. That's a discussion that I've had with many chief executives, and it's not for continuing here, but at the end of the day, the buck stops at the boss. Okay, so that's where that decision lies. I'm glad to hear that most of you are in agencies where your boss believes in releasing that video, because sooner or later, if you're not, you're going to be forced into it. And so who executes it? Well, these controversial issues come out, your PIOs generally handle it. Is that how it works in most of your agencies? If you have something critical, that's handled through your PIO's office. Does anybody online or in here, does that come through your records office releasing critical video, officer involved shooting? You won? Okay, well, smaller agencies, you may be both, wearing multiple hats, right? Let's see if anybody, so PIO, we have one person says yes, they're the ones that do it. Most of the folks say PIO. So generally, the way that video for controversial issues gets to the public is through the PIO mechanism. Some of you are mandated by state law, others can, and this doesn't have to be necessarily negative stuff, this can also be positive things, right? But when it comes to records, for the public records request, it all funnels through you. So yeah, there's the issue of when do we release video for these controversial things, and I understand that. We could talk for hours on that. But the day-to-day public records requests or open records requests come through your mechanism, okay? Is anybody in a system where open records requests don't come to records, they come somewhere else in your agency? Anybody online? So if anybody online have anybody but the records folks get it, then I don't see any answers. So it looks like everybody, public records requests come to records. So what's released? There are things that are mandatory release by law. You just can't get away from it, right? Though some places try. And so is it, let's say there you had an officer has body camera video on, there is a vagrant asleep on a bus bench, and in your jurisdiction, that's against the law. However, the officer didn't arrest him, didn't cite him, just got out of his car and moved him along. Now somebody comes in, puts a records request in. Would you allow that record to go out? Okay. okay, possibly redacted. So those are voluntary release issues. You know, there's mandatory things by law. If you're in California, things involved with officer-involved shootings and critical incidents. And some of the other states have mandatory release, and on the reverse side of that, things you will not release. Then there's voluntary. Almost every state, can't say for all of them because I haven't researched every state, but almost every state's public records law has something when it comes to public records that it's up to the agency, has discretion on whether or not to release. No matter if the agency determines, it's some verbiage like it's in the best interest of the agency to do so. Okay? So that's the voluntary release. And then there's exemptions to the release. You can release, or, you can release, you don't have to release, you're allowed exemptions. For typical one is criminal investigation. Some have, you have exemptions from your state law on open records requests for things like sexual assault. It depends from state to state. There are those exemptions, and I'm sure you're all aware of them. But frequently, if you're from that circle the wagons type of agency, it's this guy on the screen that's doing the no, we're not giving anything out. Again, begs the question of accountability versus transparency and privacy. If you're going to do this, why aren't you releasing what you can? Many times, and I realize we'll get to the whole resource issue. I realize that there's a drain on the agency, but what is that? Public Records Law 101. It doesn't matter how much of a pain in the rear end this is for you. You've got to do it. Don't care if you're an agency with 50 people in your record section, 5, or as I had a woman this morning, an army of 1, right? Nobody cares. The laws don't talk about, well, it's okay if you're an agency, small agency, you don't have to do it. Doesn't work that way. So, body camera records policy. How many of you were asked and participated in development of your body camera policy for your agency? A handful. Anybody online? Okay. Anybody online involved in the, maybe a committee that was put together the body camera policy? Okay. Frequently, when I ask that question, a lot of records people weren't involved. So I'm glad to see that things are starting to change with policy development, because while the vast majority of that policy has really nothing to do with records, there's a lot of it that does. There are some things in there that are very key. And if you have somebody that's sitting in a vacuum writing policy for body cameras and not including the records folks, that's a mistake, because you're one of the executors of the end result, one of the people that answer to that public consumer. So here's some things to think about when it comes to body camera records policy. You have to have a solid body camera policy. Realize this is not your area of expertise. How many of you are from agencies that use a Lexipol policy? Okay. Now, these are, again, templates, right? You build on those, you just don't take it and stick it in your policy manual. It's meant to be adapted and adjusted. That means the rest of you in here are from agencies that write your own policy. That policy has to be solid. If it's not good, it's going to affect you. Okay, because you're going to be dealing with the fallout of not having solid body camera policy. You have to have a good records policy. These are two different things, okay? I highly encourage, how many of you in here have, I hope everybody has a records policy. I know there was one person this morning was from an agency that doesn't. How many of you in here with records policy, and folks online, the handling for public records release of body camera video is covered in your records section policy? Hands? How many of it is covered in your general body camera policy? And how many just don't address it at all? Okay, like, so I'm your local citizen. I now want to come and put a public records request in for a piece of body camera video. Where do I go? If I'm a citizen, how do I know? Where do I go? What do I do? How's that handled? Who has the policy? We got one of the folks online is they're currently in development of their records policy. Okay. This is critical. It's got to be covered somewhere. What we see kind of a blend is the very detailed process is in the records section policy of the manual. And there's usually in the body camera video policy is a paragraph or so that says, you know, if you want to request a body camera video, for example, you go to acmepolicedepartment.com, you click on the link, or you call, or however you funnel people from their policy, right? And but there should be a statement in your body camera policy that talks about how to steer people to the actual policy, wherever it is that tells exactly how that's done. Be specific in your records policy about how you handle this video. I will say this, you'll hear me say this over and over again, this is not paper. If you handle body camera video like you handle paper, from a record standpoint, you're in for a rude awakening one of these days. There are so many things. If you're doing this properly, release, this has to be very detailed. There are so many things, because again, remember, going all the way back to the beginning of this when I talked about how important video is, people expect it. And if you don't deliver it, you don't deliver it the proper way, somebody's going to call you on it. Somebody's going to call you on it. A major police department in this country went through a very controversial shooting a number of years ago. At the time, I was the body camera manager for Las Vegas. And within 48 hours of that controversial shooting, I got a public records request from the Associated Press. Okay, so this was a Midwest city, and I'm in Las Vegas. What did they want from me? They wanted to see how we did our auditing. Okay, how we looked and ensured that we met the requirements of public records release. Why do you think they wanted that? They knew we were doing it. They just wanted to use it to bludgeon this other agency. Okay, somebody's going to look, somebody's going to ask, especially if there's a failure on how you handle your video. So make sure that it's very specific. Outline the process in detail. Vet that policy. Okay, so vet this throughout your entire agency so that everybody understands how these requests are handled. Okay, and I think I asked the question earlier, all requests are funneled through the folks that are attending this seminar, so there's no chance, I don't think, well, I think somebody said in here they have it going through a sergeant somewhere. This process of intake and how that video, that request is handled inside your agency needs to be in your policy, and everybody that plays in that, from the intake portion of it, all the way through sending it up to your maybe city attorney or general counsel or to your chief executive, that process, everybody has to be involved in that. Okay? Everybody has to look at this policy to ensure that everybody understands their role and their part to play. So body camera processes, records processes. As I said earlier, it ain't paper. What's your workflow? Does your current policy have all these things in it in excruciating detail? Okay. And unfortunately, we ran into some time constraints, so I can't go into a lot of detail, but you know, how do you take the request? Is it the same way you take a paper request? You know, how's that retrieved? Do you have access to every single video in your digital evidence management system? Or are there buckets that you can't get into? Most agencies wall stuff off. If it's an internal affairs investigation, guess what? You don't have access to it. Okay, so how's it retrieved? Do you have to go to somebody in how many are in agencies that aren't allowed to get into your digital evidence management system? Anybody? One. Okay, anybody online? Okay, So, you know, this who retrieves the record to meet to meet this request is very important. How is that routed? So do you just pull out, how do you know it's not an investigation? Who's determining that this is a valid record to be released? The decision point. How do you prepare that video? What's the process? How many of you actually have the capability in your record section to do redaction right now? A handful. For those of you that don't, I'm assuming you send it off to somebody. Who do you send it off to? How's that managed? What's that process? What are the timelines? How do you deliver the video to the requester? Okay. You don't want a workflow chart like it's on the screen. This needs to be all thought out in excruciating detail and be in your policy. Which brings us to the fourth P, which is the process. So who does what? This is the actual, you've got your policy, you've worked through all these things. Who does what? Who reviews the video to determine whether or not it's going to be released? Who determines there's privacy issues? I know when I asked this question earlier, some of you said you're the ones that determine privacy, but we agreed that not all of you could pass a test on what's private or not. Anybody, any of the non-police personnel in this room experts on Fourth Amendment? And yet, if you're in an agency, it says that's your responsibility before you release it. Well, that's all fine and dandy until you mess it up and you release something that's private. And we all know the stuff that's on paper, right? Well, we know to black out the social security number. We know to redact the social security number on a screen, date of birth, that sort of thing. But can height, weight, voice be an identifier? Okay, a lot of things can be that. So, you have to determine what's private in order to do the redaction. You have to make contact with the requester in many cases. Now, that process, because many times you're going to find that establishing contact with a requester can be very important. If you make the decision, every state has a public records law, I believe every state, has a citizen's right to inspect a record and get a copy of the record. And so what we're doing in many cases is we're jumping right to the second option. We're going to provide you with a copy. Hence the 600 requests, 15 people sitting in the dark room with a little green visor all day redacting videos. What if people just want to look? What if inspection's enough? Okay. Many times, how many are from states you can charge money to? Okay. Sometimes a lot of money, right? That won't last long. You're going to lose that. Okay. Why? In Las Vegas, we could charge, at the time, we could charge $49 an hour to prepare video for release. $49 an hour. That's a lot of money. The argument is, if you're homeless and you're a citizen, obviously you're a citizen, you're homeless, does that, because you're homeless and don't have any money, and does that negate the state's obligation to provide information? No. So how do you fight that argument? Well, it costs $49 an hour. How does a poor person afford that? Okay, you will lose those. That's starting to fall all around the country. So don't depend on that being there forever. What's the other thing? Time. People want things instantaneously. There's a reason they want that video. Okay, and states have timelines for release of this video. But what if we could make them happy by just letting them look? Many times, that's all they want. And by the way, I can have you look a lot faster than I can redact, because once I let it go, once it leaves the agency, it's gone for good. You can't pull it back. Okay? And then delivery of that record. How do you deliver it to people? Does your vendor provide the ability for you to push that video? Are you using an online redaction service that you can shoot it to people? What about people that don't have access to computers? What if you got to drop it to DVD? Okay, that technology. How many of you bought a computer lately that doesn't have a DVD drive? Right? That technology is fading away. What are you going to do? Thumb drive? What's your plan? Right? So in your process that you design, and there's a lot of ways to do this. This is not the part of this class is not about figuring out all the ways to possibly do that. These are just some things to consider. But obviously, you have to look at your resources and how you're going to apply your resources. If it takes a lot of time, if you get a lot of requests, you get 600 requests, and you have 100, you grant 100 of them. You can't do that overnight without a small army. So how do you meet that state timeline? And every state's got the extension thing. You can always go to the extension route. But how do you meet that? Okay, it's all about balancing that challenge. One thing that you have to do and do with excruciating detail is every step of this way with body camera video is document. Document, document, document. Every time you contact the requester, every time if you do the inspection route, when they come in, what they ask for. There's a whole process that goes behind that. Train your staff. Again, this gets back to the whole issue of training folks to handle this process, to do the privacy stuff if you're doing that. I'm going to finish this slide, and then I'm going to go to questions because we're just out of time here, and I apologize for the power failure. So some things to think about in conclusion here. Think about this inspection option. There's some ways to do that. Bringing people in, letting them look at the video in a controlled environment. They don't get copies, they just get to look. The redaction to look is a lot less than the redaction to release. Some, maybe not even hardly any at all. Pay attention to your retention schedules. Case clearance. If your case clearance is horrible for your other records, and if your evidence vault is full of evidence from 1988, it's not going to get better with body cameras. That's generally a problem with your prosecutor's office. So work on that so you're not holding, because everything that isn't cleared, you get to hold in your cloud or on-prem storage and pay for. Be very careful about deletion of records, because once it's gone, you cannot get it back. And we know that that is a horrible liability situation. And finally, we talked about this, and I'm not going to belabor this, is privacy redaction. Whole other section, don't want to get into it. It was only a couple of slides. I want to stop here now and open it up for questions. I know we got some online here. Yes, ma'am.
So, as I mentioned before, we just barely implemented our body cam
Mhm.
program in the beginning. So our property and evidence division actually manages all of our dash cam and body video. So we had to overcome the initial evidence and discovery mindset of we release everything. And then my command staff says, no, we're not releasing anything. So then I typically, as the record supervisor, am the voice of reason between the two. So, I mean, how typical is it for the property and evidence division to handle body cam video under the public record?
Okay, so her question was, we have an agency here where there's a lot of people involved, and the question is, how common is it to have an evidence section run the video or manage the video? So who houses it and manages it, whether it's an evidence section or a body camera management section or professional standards, if they're responsible for the day-to-day control of that, making sure it's uploaded and deleted and the kind of the house cleaning of the system, that's one thing. If they're handling records, then you have a problem. Then you have, just because they manage it, just because I'm the one responsible for the health of the digital evidence management system, doesn't mean I should be doing everything in it. If they're handling records requests, that is a recipe for disaster. And, well, unless they've got somebody from your records section assigned over there.
That was kind of a problem that I presented during the development of our policy is that they don't, and I'm trying to educate her on the actual of the state, more alert of what we do. But it's challenging, so I'm trying to come up with
Yeah,
how often that actually.
it's not very, I can tell you, I've heard of it happening once or twice before, but not very common. But when it comes to the actual public records, that's always goes back to the records section. I'm surprised that it's like, I tell this all the time to people when it comes to redaction. Is it easier for me to teach a police officer to look and review, which is something I highly recommend before any video is released? Some police officer at some level looks at that video to make sure that if you're doing all the redaction, that you touched all the bases. Is it easier to teach a cop to on records stuff or a records person on Fourth Amendment and all those issues? That's a question you have to ask. So, no, not do the redaction, to review it. So I'll give you a quick example. So the question that I got was I recommending that a police, why am I recommending a police officer look at that? The reason I'm doing that is because, for example, a personal example out of Las Vegas. It's always sunny in Las Vegas, and in Nevada at that time, the image of an officer could not be released to the public without the officer's knowledge. Okay, so we had one of our first body camera requests came in, and my team we trained them on how to do all the redaction stuff. And my sergeant comes in, he's pretty proud of this first initiative. And unfortunately, I look at it and I go, you missed something. Okay. The reflection of the officer, it's sunny there all the time, so the sun's always out, right? The reflection of the officer dealing with the citizen was caught in the side mirror of the car. Something small, right? Something small. And a name tag that identified it. But there's a lot of issues there. Fourth Amendments can be very, identifying people can be very subtle, and more than we can talk about here. But it's an officer should ensure that everything that was caught, should be caught, was caught on that video. It's a good double check system. Let's take a question from online. Noreen asks, do you have an example of a policy that works well that you'd be willing to share? Yes, we've got something. If you will reach out to us via email after the conference, we'll get a policy, recommended policy. There's some good standard templates out there. Let's see who else we've got here. That was the only one? Okay. Anybody online have any other questions? Okay, yes, ma'am. Yeah. So the question was, can an officer get in trouble if they don't activate the camera? So the two biggest things that get agencies on the front page of the newspaper: failure to activate and turn the camera off at the wrong time. Most of those are attached to bad training, bad policy. If your policy says right now for body camera, for example, the officer will turn on the camera anytime there's a police citizen encounter, that's a failure. It's gonna lead to failure. If your policy says, the officer can turn the body camera off when there's, 1, 2, 3 examples, and that's it, or you can never deactivate the camera, that's going to be a fail. So yes, and unfortunately what happens is in those cases where they don't activate, there's not a record. Okay. Something else to remember in the world of body cameras: if you release a record to somebody, I put a public records request in, and you don't give me the whole video. Let's say I come in and inspect the video and say, oh, I don't need the whole thing. That costs too much time, money, effort. I only want 5 minutes of it. And you release that. What do we have now? We have another record, right? So you got to keep track of these. Otherwise, if your state requires, so now I'm the third person comes in. I want the same video that I saw on channel 5. Do you know what that is? Do you know exactly what that is? Okay, and we all know there's those people out there that like to poke sharp sticks at the records people. The frequent flyers. So that's always a challenge. But yes, that is the single biggest thing to get agency into trouble.
Like one thing our agency, so we recently got a grant on, because like she was saying, making sure they turn body cameras on. Right now, we have the body cameras where they have to hit the button to turn it on. But I just got us a grant for the new watch guard ones where they automatically come on.
So this,
So that's the big thing.
yeah, so this automatic activation, again, the more, going back to that chart that I showed the activation of the camera and upload and storage, the more that camera's on, the more you have to store it. And I don't have the slide in this presentation, but policy dictates when a camera's activated. When a camera's activated, a record is created, a record that has to be stored and therefore it has to be accessed and is subject to release. So every time that camera comes on, I wish there was a little red light in your room, in your office that went on every time a cop turned a camera on. Depending on the size of your organization, you'd probably get be shocked. But every time that goes on, that's a record and something that has to be maintained. Any other quick questions? We've run out of time. I'll answer one more and then we'll. Okay, so this is part of a bigger, if you're going to take the inspection route, there's some things to think about. If I bring somebody into a room with a computer, a slaved screen that shows the video, and they watch that video, they're not coming in with anything to write with. You can't take pictures, you're not bringing your cell phone in there. They have the right to inspect. If I have an issue with a police officer on a car stop and I want to see that video, what's private in that video? Probably very little. Maybe if the officer went back with his camera on, got in the car, and the computer had some criminal justice stuff. But remember, they're not writing anything down. A social security number being broadcast by another unit, we don't have to worry about that. They're not going to memorize that, right? But if you release that video, that stuff has to be taken care of. Okay, so that's a very small example, but you start to see the cut down. Now you say, well, if I do all these inspections, it's just easier if I have, somebody sitting in a room doing that. Not so much, because these are resource intensive. People say, I want 4 hours of video from that call. Somebody's sitting there doing 4 hours, and that's a lot of work. And then what you don't know is what the person actually wanted. You did 4 hours of redaction, took you, 20 hours of hard work, and the person at the other end that got it looks at it for 20 seconds, goes, I guess the cop wasn't such a jerk, and throws it in the trash can. Okay? So that's what you're trying to avoid. Thank you for your time and attention. I apologize profusely about the technology problems, the power issue. Long subject, 2 days worth of information crammed into an hour. Thank you for your attendance. I appreciate it. And for the folks online, thank you. I appreciate your responses as well. I do know Jack Clements, Catherine. I do. We worked together at Metro. Ask him if he, I'm sure you've probably heard about Fireman. What was Jim Carrey played on in Living Color years ago? Fireman Bob, Fireman Jack, whatever it was. Fireman Bill. That was kind of his nickname. Fire Marshal Bill. Yes, thank you. Yes, if anybody's interested in more information on this, contact PRI or contact Principus Group Incorporated. and I will, personally get hold of me, and I will talk to you more about possible training and that sort of thing. All right, folks. Thank you so much. I do. Let me type it here. All right, folks. Thank you so much. I'm sorry.